just use that verse from Psalm 19, verse 14, at the end of the prayer. Because all of Psalm 19 is also part of our lectionary for the day. It's a familiar verse that I'm sure many of you have heard others use in preparation for a sermon or message they were about to give. And I'm pretty sure that I've even used it. And I invite you to read the 13 preceding verses in this psalm on your own. Okay. So, have you given any thought to being needy? In our gospel reading today from 1 Corinthians, we again have a very familiar passage. Except we generally hear this in the fall of the year when we are in the process of filling out our committees and discerning who among us might possess the gifts to do that position justice. But today I would like to start looking at this passage in our own being needy context. This past week, we had a group from St. Luke and a couple other churches go to the Midwest Distribution Center to help them in their mission to transform the resources of God's people into humanitarian relief. Now, they could have all gone down individually at any time and helped the MMDC in this mission. But I'm pretty sure those who went would all agree going as a group allowed them to accomplish so much more than they could have individually. Because as a group, or one body, they were more effective together through power and partnership. And a big part of this, I'm sure, was the fellowship they shared and the encouragement they were able to give each other throughout the many and varied tasks that they did while they were there. St. Luke is like that. We are one body made up of many parts or individuals, each of us with our own special skills to be used as a way to further enhance our purpose of the church to work together toward the mission of making disciples. But we cannot succeed in our mission of making disciples for the transformation of the world unless we are working together, truly valuing and depending on the gifts that each of us offers for the good of the whole. Again, we have different gifts that we are using to make St. Luke what we are as God's church. Whether it's serving on committees or setting things up for a meal, singing in the choir, teaching or leading a study, or heading up a fundraiser. All of these things are so important, but not one more important than the other, because we must use all of our spiritual gifts in order for this to be God's church. We must first admit that we need each other, but that can be hard since we don't always want to believe that we need help. And we may not even know who we may need that help from. It would really mean that the right question or questions must be asked. And that is not what can I do, but what can we do? It is this power and partnership that will enable us to use all of our spiritual gifts to truly make this God's church. Now, that sounds pretty simple and straightforward, but it really isn't just about making sure that St. Luke is doing our best to make sure it is God's church. It is really about us being disciples and disciple makers, because being a disciple is all about being needy. We need to learn from Jesus and to do our best to live like him, because we also need to learn from each other and continue to ask ourselves, what can we do to continue to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all I have commanded you. To be a disciple, we could say that a disciple of Jesus is a worshiper, a servant, and a witness. And to explain this a little further, I found an article by Jonathan Parnell, who's a pastor at Cities Church in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He defines these three disciple traits like this. Disciple meaning worshiper. Most fundamentally, to follow Jesus means to worship him exclusively. This is at the heart of Jesus' ministry on earth. As he told the woman at the well, the Father is seeking true worshipers, not faux worshipers. And I happened to think of that when Pam was doing the children's sermon this morning. So is that what sixlets are, or the little other candies that don't have the M on them? But those who worship him in spirit and truth, which means, as it did in her case, we shouldn't be so quick to change the subject. If we follow Jesus, we must worship God through Jesus, because he is our mediator, and Jesus himself, because he is God. This is the fundamental perspective of a disciple, because it is more ultimate than anything else we are to do, and most distinctive in our context. As far as ultimate worshiping Jesus, gladly reflecting back to him the radiance of his worth. It is the greatest act for any creature. As far as context, nothing will irritate our pluralistic society more than being an exclusive worshiper of Jesus. Lots of people are cool with Jesus, or at least their notion of him, and even following the ways of Jesus. When it leaves out the exclusivity part, Jesus, the moral teacher, the nice guy, the judge, not lest you be judged, motivational speaker, that Jesus is everybody's homeboy. But that is not the real Jesus. That's a man-made figure, a far cry from the portrait Jesus gives of himself. To follow Jesus, to be his disciple, doesn't mean community involvement and a veneer of tolerance. It means mainly, first and central, to worship him, with joy at the heart. Making disciples of Jesus means gathering his worshipers. And for disciple meaning servant, John shows another picture of Jesus we are to worship, and this time he is kneeling before his disciples to wash their feet. I know it doesn't sound right, especially when we think of him as the object of our exclusive praise. It doesn't sound right to Peter either, until Jesus said, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." But Jesus is a servant. He came to earth not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as the rescue for sinners. And as a servant, Jesus says of his disciples, to his disciples, "If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do as I have done to you." In one sense, the posture of servant should characterize Jesus' disciples on all fronts. But in another sense, being a servant like Jesus has a particular focus on disciples serving disciples. It's a family thing. Let us do good to everyone, Paul said, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. This one another angle is where Jesus takes us in giving a new commandment. Just after he washed the 12's feet, "The commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another." In fact, it is this love that disciples have for each other that identifies us as disciples of Jesus to a watching world and even assures us of saving faith. To be a disciple of Jesus means to serve like him. It means to serve primarily by looking at your brothers and sisters and going low in acts of love, even when it's an inconvenience to yourself, even when it flip-flops the world's social order and expectations. Making disciples of Jesus means making servants who love one another. And disciples meaning witness. And in John also, he gives another helpful picture of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. This time it comes in the commission of Jesus, when he says to his disciples, to his disciples, "As the Father has sent me, even so am I sending you." This means that Jesus' disciples are on a mission. It means in the broadest sense that they are missionaries that are envisioned and empowered to step into the world, not of it, but sent into it as his witness. Jesus sent us for a purpose, to reveal God and redeem sinners. And he set his face like flint to see it accomplished. We too, as disciples filled by his Spirit, are sent for a purpose, to tell his good news. To be a disciple of Jesus means to point people to him. It means to tell the old story of Jesus and his love, so that others would know and worship him. It means, in other words, that we gladly seek more worshipers, servants, missionaries. Which is to say, a disciple of Jesus makes disciples of Jesus, as Jesus tells us to. And of course, when Jesus speaks, we listen. Now, as good and strong as we are here at St. Luke, we will never learn all we want and need to know from each other about being a disciple. When he tells his church to make disciples of all nations, we really do want that. We really need to do that. To me, this is a case of where want and need are one and the same. In order for us to fulfill this want, we need new disciples among us to meet Jesus, and for them to be needy from us, and for us to be needy from them. This is the way we continue to learn about this great everlasting life that God has promised us. But first, we must admit that we are needy, that we need to be needed, that we need each other, and that others need us, that we need Jesus, and yes, that we need God. Amen. Let us pray.